Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. Welcome to the show. My name is Scott. This is the Council on Future Conflicts episode. What are we? 476. Today we're talking Putin in the news and is Africa gonna blow? This is one of those kind of things where it's not one big story, but a lot of stuff kind of sounding off around these two kind of topics: Putin and Russia, and Africa. A lot of stuff going on in Africa lately, Joe. I think more so than normal, but there's always something going on in Africa. And it's kind of like a conflict powder keg. It's always ready to blow at any point.
I've heard that the future is all about the global south, whatever that is. And
A
in
future of
Africa,
conflict.
yes. I don't think there's ever been a time when Africa hasn't been a powder keg, but it does seem to be ramping up quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, but I do think that there is a little more going on there now, than maybe there has been in maybe the last, 10 or so years. So we'll have to look at it a little more. Definitely if, one of the things that I know you've been following over the last, ever since that expropriation law was passed, but then, Trump brought it up, the South Africa deal. We're going to be talking about this later in the show, but I know this is something near and dear to both of our hearts. We got our buddies Canine Reaper and Gideon down there. I tell you what, that if of all the things that has the ability to potentially blow up into something that is more impactful to the wider world, I think that's it.
I think when you compare the expropriation bill with the absolute utter defeat that the SANDF just had at the hands of essentially Tutsi tribesmen who live in the bush,
Yeah.
um, the two things don't paint a very good picture of life in South Africa. So,
Yeah, I think that's generally true. Oh, how the mighty has fallen is kind of what you think when you think of the South African Defense Force. They at one point had the most advanced army in all of Africa, and now, I mean, I don't rate them anywhere on the kind of global top, 50.
what's funny is I seem to recall us a year ago talking about them suffering a pretty serious defeat in Mozambique, and now they're suffering one in Goma. So, very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yep, and we'll be talking more about that later in the show. Joe, how you doing today, brother?
You know what? This disease, whatever I have, is lingering around and just won't let go, which sucks because I'm supposed to be in the field for like 10 days straight. So
Yeah,
that's really gonna suck.
you,
So
you you need to start like dosing your yourself with the vitamin C and all that shit, man, and just try to.
yeah, and I generally tough it out in a tent with everybody else, but I may have to, as Be Prepared said the other day, take the on top of the hill cheat code and sleep in the house instead of out in the field when I'm not feeling better. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
Joe, guys like you and I have spent enough nights in the wood line to where I don't feel like I have to you know,
I
I don't
don't
have
know
to
though
prove
because
anything.
Jim was the absolute legend. You weren't there this time, but we're there one night, and of course the you know how certain things flow at the G camp in the evening, and Jim had come down to visit, and he decided he wasn't going to drive home. So at like 30 degrees, Jim just grabbed a sleeping bag and nothing else and went into trees and slept all night. That man is a hard man. He's a legend. So
Well, I tell you, Jim's been in a lot of places where it's like, you just have to kind of sack up and do what you can.
well, that night when it was me and you and Jim in the garage, and we were like, "Oh, it's not the first time we slept on a cement floor." And Jim's like, "Me neither." I'm like, "Okay, all right, my bad, my bad." But yeah, anyway, I'm
All
looking
right.
forward to it, getting out and hanging out with people and having a good time doing some classes, and it's going to be crazy.
And as you in the chat, by the way, welcome chat. How's everybody doing? We have no watcher today. He decided to make a dental appointment for today. I think he to his chagrin, he forgot what time he had made it and didn't realize the conflict. So, in fairness,
In his defense, I don't think Watford does a whole lot of looking at calendars
I
and
don't
see.
think so. I don't think so. I don't know how much he looks at anything. Uh,
The
but
kid's
in
got a
fair,
million things going. He's just fixing
I
to get
know.
it
He's
again.
so busy. In fairness, though, he came in. He was chagrined, and he put together the thumbnail and the show, the rooms and everything, and built all that stuff for us. So he's a trooper, and thank you very much. Council on future scheduling conflict. That's exactly right. All right, Joe. It's just me and you today, so that means we might cruise through this one and give a little time back to the folks. So let's see how it goes. Let's jump right in on the first one here. So I don't know. What do you think? You think people are happy with the way things are going in Washington since the inauguration?
I'm sorry, I was reading Arctic Boy's medical prescription to me for things that I don't have. Anyway, uh,
Um, what's your kind of take on the popularity of how the old POTUS is doing since inauguration?
I mean, what do you want me to say?
I
He's
mean, I
doing
just
fine, but we don't have to. That doesn't have to be the only thing we ever talk about.
no. We're going to talk about this poll, the CBS News poll, and I just wanted before I throw it up here, I just wanted to get your take. You think it's going to be more positive or more negative, or
I think it's probably going to be more negative because they selectively picked who they wanted to talk to.
Well, so I think you're right. I think that they engineered this poll, but the problem is the way it's going. They're not able to engineer it. This just goes to show that when they lose their USAID funding or whatever, their poll engineering department is out to lunch. Maybe it says here President Donald Trump's lawsuit against CBS News over its news distortion of a 60 Minutes interview, and that may be the other thing that kind of causes CBS to become a little more unbiased. With the then Vice President Kamala Harris may have compelled the left-leaning media organization to actually report news. This is a new CBS YouGov survey of 2,175 adults interviewed last week, found President to be a tough, energetic, and focused and effective in his first few weeks as office. And with his overall job rating being 53 approve, 47 disapprove. Now, this is an improvement on the actual vote total because I think he ended up winning 52%. So this is even better than the election results. It says here many respondents said the president is going over and beyond in helping the nation, and very few saying he is doing less. It says here he's described Donald Trump as, and these are the top answers: 69% said tough, 63% said energetic, 60% said focused, 58% said effective. And when it comes to his campaign promise, he is doing. The Trump campaign promises he is doing what he promised in the campaign, which is shocking, Joe. I mean, a politician in the modern era doing what they promised.
Say it ain't so.
I don't know about this. This is setting a poor precedent. The rest of the politicians are out there thinking, oh, maybe I'm going to have to start earning my pay. And then 30% said it's different from what he promised. Trump's overall job rating, 53 approve. Trump administration's program to deport immigrants illegally in the U.S., 59% approve. I mean, this is a massive vote of support for what has become his kind of cornerstone project that he's kind of launched his second term with.
But you see, this is the problem with the elites is they'll say, well, Yeah, he's popular to most people, but that's why populism is bad, because those dumb people
They
don't
don't
know
get it.
what's good for them.
Exactly right, Joe. I mean, and this is elitism all over, right? It's like you can't take care of yourself. You don't know what's best. We know what's best. Don't listen to your aunt Mabel down the street. Listen to this Harvard professor because he's got the credentials. It goes with that credentialism argument that the left always makes as well. Let's see. Sending U.S. troops to the U.S. Mexico border even more popular with 64% approve and 36% disapprove. That's actually kind of surprising, Joe. Maybe it's because it's less disruptive than deportations, but ultimately, I think people saw the benefit when he sent the troops to the border the last go around was it 2018, 2019, and I think they remember those successes. Large detention centers while determining who should be deported. Now this has a little less favor. 48% favor, 52% opposed. This actually I think this. I'll be honest with you, Joe. These numbers jive with what I think is probably the prevailing will out
I'll
there.
be honest, we don't need large detention centers. We need large aircraft. There's no
Exactly
sense in
right.
holding and housing these people any longer than necessary. The only way of deciding who should be deported is this: did you enter the country legally? No.
Oh,
You're
all
out.
right. Yep. Here's the plane. You're out of here. Trump's handling of the Israeli Hamas conflict. 54% approve of that. 46% disapprove. I'll be
So
honest with
this
you.
this should be this question right here shouldn't even be in here because it's self-defeating right there. Israel Hamas conflict. Which
Yeah.
part of that is a U.S. involvement?
Right. Let's be honest. Outside of his one kind of off the wall statement about the U.S. is going to own Gaza, he really hasn't done anything
Nor should
relating
he.
to this. Yeah, exactly right. I mean, because it's none of our fucking business. Though he did have a great quote earlier in his presidency when he said they asked him what happens if they start fighting. After the ceasefire, he goes, "I don't care." It's like I'm not involved in it. U.S. troops aren't involved, so you'll have to ask the Israelis or the Palestinians whether or not they're going to shoot at each other. U.S. No, so I agree with this one here. U.S. trying to take over Gaza would be 13% a good idea, 47% say a bad idea, or 40% say not sure, depends. That's actually a lot higher for not sure, depends than I kind of figured. What he's been talking. Trump talked about this a little more over the weekend. I honestly didn't pay much of attention to it. Joe, is this issue at all on your radar?
First of all, it is because when Donald Trump says things, it makes us look silly on the world stage when he says things like this. He should have not said anything about taking over Gaza. It's made everyone argue about whether he's doing 5D chess or it's the art of the deal. No, it was a
Yeah,
dumb comment, and it came from Jared Kushner, and it shouldn't be part of his policy. It's very
yeah,
simple.
yeah. I
There's
tend to
the
agree with
reason
that.
why their numbers are skewed there. Abysmal idea wasn't one of the options, which is what it should say.
Right.
We have no role in managing Gaza, nor should we want one.
Yeah, and this not sure depends. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of people, when they were asked this question, was probably the first time they had ever heard of this.
Yeah.
And then his focus on lowering prices. 60%, 66% said not enough. 31% right amount. 3% did too much. I mean, this kind of makes sense to me.
Well,
Despite
see, that's a
everything that
throwaway question designed to get a negative answer
right,
because Trump hasn't said anything about lowering prices. Not one
yeah,
thing. He can't.
right.
He's the president of the United States. It's not up to him what prices are.
Yeah, and honestly, the things that he can do that will lower prices overall, i.e., affect inflation, are generally long-term kind of things that aren't going to be things that he would be able to do immediately or even show off that, hey, listen,
Well, and,
I
and,
did
the, and
X and this is going to lower prices.
the egg thing that is caused mostly by Democratic governors demanding cage-free eggs only be sold in their states was intentional. meant to drive up prices on a
Yep.
commodity that almost everyone has to buy, just so they can have this talking point.
Looks like most of the people will favor tariffs on China, but less so on Mexico, Europe, and Canada.
That's because they
Of
don't
note,
understand the tariffs that those places already put on U.S.
on
goods.
U.S. right, the idea that we're basically getting raked over the coal by all of our best trade partners are basically tariffing us into oblivion. Um, let's see. Elon and Doge influence over government operations and spending should be Elon and Doge influence should be a lot, some, not much, or none. 23% say a lot, 28% say some. So honestly, that's a pretty big amount right there. That's over 50% say some or a lot. 18% say not much, and 31% say none. I mean, of note, none is the largest of any of these. But let's be honest: if you're in any of the other ones, you think that Doge should be able to, you know, clean up the government on some level. And just Joe, for all my money, I think that the one thing that Trump's done that's been most disruptive to the neo-Marxists in America has been what the Doge has done with organizations like USAID, and it looks like they're moving on to the Department of Education next, and then he's talked about bringing Ron Paul in to lead the audit of the Fed, which is frankly like when he started calling for that stuff 20 years ago. That was when I became aware of audit the Fed, the whole Ron Paul movement.
If you want to start a civil war, that's how you do it.
Yeah, this is one thing that I don't think anybody ever thought would ever happen. So
The Fed is their version of "don't touch the boats," right?
yeah, right. That's exactly right.
Well, here's the thing: when you look at everyone who's getting mad about some of the exposures of what's been going on at USAID, no one is mad at the expenditures. They're mad that you found out about it. Ask
Right.
yourself why. And I pointed this out yesterday, is that it proves the old maxim that whatever you think your government is doing, the truth is 10 times worse.
Yeah.
This is raw, unedited truth that proves it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it shows in these numbers the split out between Democrats and Republicans, right? So 30% of Republicans say they should have a lot, whereas only 17% of Democrats. 44% of Republicans. So you're looking at 74% think a lot or some control over government operations and spending should be held by Doge. That's a pretty good vote of confidence. But even so, you still have over 30% of Democrats saying the exact same thing. So that's not nothing. That's a lot of Democrats out there saying maybe we need to get to the bottom of this stuff. If there's a death nail to the modern Democratic Party, it's in those people right there. Not much is 20 on the Democratic side, 16 on Republican, and this is pretty kind of all figured this would happen. None is 49% Democrats, 10% Republicans. So there's been some interesting kind of stuff coming out as far as just opinions of people based on Doge. You've got and then you've also got that what is it? There's a judge that put a restraining order, a TRO against Doge for being able to look at Treasury data. So it'll be interesting to see how they fight that out.
It's not only against Doge, though; it's also against the Secretary of the Treasury.
Treasury, right. Well, because they said basically only two people should have access to all that data, right? And that's ridiculous. I mean, it's just, and let's be honest, Joe, a random federal judge does not have the authority to do that. Only
It does not.
Only the potentially the Supreme Court or Congress could stop something
No,
like
they
that
don't
from
either.
happening. But even right, they would have to make a law. The Congress would have to make a law that says you can't do this, and then the Supreme Court would then have to say yes, that law is constitutional, which it wouldn't be because the executive, right? So this is just one of those kind of things where people don't understand how the powers of the three parts of government work and who the three parts of government are, because only the Supreme Court is a co-equal branch with the president, the executive, and the legislature. So,
right, the administrative state's trying to make itself a separate entity somewhere in the middle there,
yeah,
and it is not. It reports 100% to the president of the United States, or is supposed to. But as we saw the last time Donald Trump was president, they do not.
they do not. All right. I wonder, this is actually this tweet here is all the points are left leaning. So imagine how high the numbers really are. So they threw as much kind of left kind of bias into this as they could get away with, and yet this is the numbers you get if you
I want to make
actually
an
polled real
administrative
people
note here that the U.S. Army is very proud of your ability to read slides to everyone. Great job. Great job.
I don't understand.
You just read the entire PowerPoint to us like a good officer would. Great job.
Our next story. This happened last week, and we didn't really talk about it. But then again, we didn't have a whole lot of stuff going on in the Philippines to kind of bring this up. But
I
this is
want to
the
say
kind
that
of
Philippine politics sounds much more fun than American politics. I'm just saying.
when you have so much winning, it is not what you'd call thrilling. It's just you're just getting sick of all the winning, Joe. That's what I'm reading here.
Okay.
Philippine Vice President Duarte impeached over Marcos' assassination remark and other allegations. What's her relationship to the former President Duarte?
She is his daughter.
Daughter, right? It's so you have this weird kind of like dynastic kind of like thing going on here, which is kind of ironic.
He does kind of look like Rodrigo in a wig. I'm not even going to lie.
It's true. Philippines President, Vice President Sara Duterte was impeached Wednesday on a range of accusations that include plotting to assassinate the president, large-scale corruption, and failing to strongly denounce China's aggressive actions against the Filipino forces in the disputed South China Sea. Now, if I remember correctly, her dad was very much kind of like willing to buddy with China on a lot of the stuff. But towards the end, he got a little. I think he got a little bitter on, the Chinese were putting him over a barrel, essentially.
I think you give him too much credit. He was playing both sides against the middle, and he was milking both sides for as much cash as he could milk them. And it worked. And he found that the U.S. has a little bit deeper pockets than China.
Yeah, I mean, it's Marcos. The Marcos family is, I think, definitely sees themselves more in that kind of as corrupt as they may be. See themselves more in that kind of the traditional Philippine, U.S. alignment versus,
so.
And because they're scared shitless about essentially getting swallowed up by China, which is, I think, ultimately a legitimate fear.
The what was it? The Hook Rebellion. They've been worried about that, and that's why Chinese influence operations are big in the Philippines. So.
Let's see. Marcos has boosted defense ties with this country treaty ally, the United States, while the vice president's father, former President Rodrigo Duterte, nurtured cozy relations with China and Russia during the stormy term that ended in 2022. This is This is definitely it's this is her being completely incompetent. I think ultimately, well, I read a story last week that kind of talked about it. Like she's like talking to hitmen and like literally. I got the feeling that it was like she couldn't get anybody else to really support her, so she instead of going for a coup or something like that, she was basically talking to people to how can we just bump off Marcos and then take over.
The whole
That
thing
was
was the whole back and forth between these two was a little bit silly. I don't even know where her first thought came of, but what she said was, "If if he kills me, I've already got it set up for someone to take him out." And I'm like, "But nobody threatened to kill you." It's really weird. It's very Filipino.
yeah. So they ran along each side with each other in 2022 in a campaign battle cry of unity in a deeply divided Southeast Asian country. Both were scions and strongmen accused of human rights violations, but their strong regional bases of support combined them to give landslide victories. Um, so basically, what they said of her was that the petition urged the Senate to shift itself into an impeachment court to try the vice president, render a judgment of conviction, remove her from office, and ban her from holding public office. Duterte's conduct throughout the tenure clearly displays gross faithlessness against the public trust and a tyrannical abuse of power that, taken together, showcases her gross unfitness to hold public office. Yeah, I mean, this is just essentially setting them up for some sort of internal struggle. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think the Philippine people are have any kind of an appetite for this kind of infighting within the political power bases of the Philippines.
Well, what's interesting is that the United States Constitution was originally written this same way, where the president and vice president would be of opposing parties. And the original intent of such a system is that they would overcome their partisan differences to work for the common good. But this is the usual end result. And that's why we scrapped it in America, and we don't do it that way anymore. But yeah, it creates for some interesting times, I guess, right? Rather than working together for the common good, it ends up being
Right.
both people trying to get in the other one's way.
Well, I mean, so there were some reports of irregularities with the money that she was kind of had at her for her usage. And she said in an online news conference in November that she had contracted an assassin to kill Marcos, his wife, and Romualdez, who, if she were killed, a threat she warned wasn't a joke. She later said she wasn't threatening him, but expressing concern over her own safety. That's funny, Joe. I'm concerned over my safety, so I'm going to hire a hitman to kill somebody. I mean,
Remind me to cancel that hit I have taken out on somebody. Uh, but you know what though? Money irregularities and threats to kill each other, that's just the way that the Philippines is, right?
right?
Only thing missing out of this story is some witchcraft.
Yeah, a little bit of voodoo, maybe. Yeah. So here's them in happier times, during the election in 22. This is So this is from the impeachment petition. Said her sheer evasiveness and silence of the West Philippine Sea issue, an issue that strikes at the core of Philippine sovereignty, is diametrically opposed to her being so loquacious on other issues. That's actually a pretty good point. I mean, if there's one thing that we've probably talked about the South China Sea more than she has. I kind of was kind of surprised by this, so I checked out some of the social media reporting on her, and she like literally there were people calling for her to make statements, and she just gives crickets. So it makes me feel like maybe China got their hooks into her at some point.
And
And
by hooks, they mean you won.
yeah. All right. Let's move on to our next. So this is kind of a little bit of a follow-up to some of the stuff we were talking about last week with the deportation of specifically of convicted criminal aliens, i.e., not just criminal aliens, but people who are actually out there as in active criminal breaches. And so in this case, they're focusing in Baltimore on MS-13. So worst go first. Baltimore ICE agents arrest MS-13 terrorists in suburban neighborhoods. So yeah, Joe. I mean, if you've got an MS-13 tattoo on you, that's a pretty good sign that that you probably should just head straight for the door. I mean,
I think that should be an indicator.
yeah,
It's pretty
well,
simple.
it's kind of like the mafia guys weren't dumb enough to tattoo mafia on their foreheads, in order to get caught up in the RICO cases. I mean, if you've got an MS-13 tattoo on you, you're basically aligning yourself in a very permanent way with that gang. So
No,
right
man, that
there,
doesn't mean Mara Salvatrucha. That means Maria Sanchez. That's my mom's name, and I'm her 13th child.
that's
Not an
right. That's
MS-13
right.
thing.
What you talking about, Willis? Embedded with the Baltimore ICE field office, Matthew Elson and his team, along with Baltimore FBI office special agent in charge, Bill Del Bagno. Hey, Joe, the FBI doing something other than harassing law-abiding Americans. Nice to see. I think they're fighting for the job at this point. Listen to what Matt says about sanctuary jurisdictions. The crazy news that we get after we pick up one of these MS-13 criminal illegals. These guys are all being aided and coached by leftist activist groups, putting everyone in your neighborhoods in danger. And so that's the thing, right, Joe, that there was all these NGOs that were basically doing everything they could to provide aid and comfort to these people who are essentially terrorists in the U.S. Makes me feel like maybe some ancillary criminal prosecutions need to follow with this.
Well, they did just threaten a bunch of sanctuary city administrators and councils that they would be targeted under Pam Bondi for
Yeah.
harboring illegals. So
It says here, let's see, let's open this tweet up. This is
anything that keeps Pam Bondi from looking at gun laws, I'm okay with.
yeah. All right, let's look at this here. So this is
individuals that are looking.
We're not going to watch this whole thing because it's 11 minutes, but I thought we would kind of just get a little taste for it.
Pick up today, associated with MS-13.
So this is Ben Bergquam with Real America's Voice.
Today's operation is going to be a crippling blow to their criminal network, and it's all thanks to the work of Immigration and Customs Enforcement and our partnership with the Department of Justice. The FBI came with some of these cases, and then some of our cases we have some leads from the DEA, the ATF, the United States Marshal Service. Like, it's a whole of government approach right now, and I can't tell you how excited we all are to be part of it. The amount of change that this is going to make locally here in the state, like, everybody will be safer living in Maryland because of today's operation.
Now, do you get the feeling, Joe, with some of these operations that they're doing, that you're starting to see a little bit of the wheat separating itself from the chaff, with some of these federal agents who are there to actually do the job versus people who are, willing to kind of just follow orders, because this is one of the things that we've been talking about, that we've always, the old saying was, hey, there's most of these are good guys, but there's a few bad apples that give them all that makes the whole barrel rot, right? But unfortunately, I think that's not the case. I think there are a few good guys in there amongst an entirely rotten organization that needs to go away.
Yeah, I think that one of the cautions here is to everyone automatically assuming this makes every ICE agent a good guy because he's actually getting out and doing his job. Every one of these guys sat at their desk for the last 4 years doing nothing and got paid to do it and didn't quit.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, quit. Yeah, the fact that yeah, it's tough, right? If you don't feel like you have a real stake, as I get the feeling that a lot of law enforcement think that they're above the little people. You know what I mean?
yes.
And I don't necessarily mean just these guys. I mean like all law enforcement get that kind of feeling. And I know one of those kind of old saws for the Republicans was back the blue, but when the blue aren't doing you any favors, maybe you don't just back them blindly. That being said, if we can identify good people that are doing good things, I thought it was interesting. One of the I didn't really go through the Super Bowl commercials, but there was apparently there was a Secret Service recruiting commercial in the Super Bowl, which I found to be kind of interesting.
I wouldn't know.
Well, that's what I get from my from perusing my internet accounts. Let's see what this guy's talking about here.
It's very immigrant heavy. But I think one of the things that's really important to remember about this for counties that are considering sanctuary policies or that are sanctuaries, the number one most likely victim of illegal alien crime are other illegal aliens. So if they're trying to protect their illegal alien community, they should be working with ICE because we will make sure that the criminals are the first to go. That's how we've always done it. Worst go first. And right now is a prime example of how we are prioritizing public safety and in today's operation, national security. MS-13 is for them where spotlight is on and everyone.
I'm gonna fast forward this. This guy's just talking way too much.
Was one of the more prolific. Scoop him up and take him off the street. It's definitely a win for the state island here.
I feel like I'm watching an episode of Cops. All right, that's enough of that. Anything else that you're seeing with these ICE raids that are, like I'm not really seeing anything that I didn't expect to see, I guess. Anything that stands out to you with these ICE raids we've been seeing over the last week?
Guys doing the job they're getting paid to do. I mean,
yeah.
Other than that, it's been a waste of money to have ICE for the last 4 years. So they didn't really do anything. They sat around the office, drank a lot of coffee, ate a lot of donuts.
Yeah.
Plotted how they could oppress their fellow man. Hey, if we're not in ICE anymore, who else can we work for? We can go kick in doors and shoot people. Unfortunately, that's a very common thread in federal law enforcement, right? Look at their treatment of Brian Malinowski. So,
yeah, is that the guy that they were talking about? That he goes to the door or whatever, and he got just. What was the deal with that story? That was the first.
They alleged that he was illegally selling guns. He was buying guns and then reselling them. But here's the thing: he worked at an airport. He was an airport manager. So if you had a search warrant for his home, first of all, he doesn't need to be home for you to do a search of his home, right? So they didn't need to go there when he was there, but they probably wanted to interview him. But if you had just waited until he went to work, he would have been forcibly unarmed. He would have had to go through metal detectors, not had a gun. Instead, they did a no-knock warrant, and when he heard people in his house in the middle of the night, he grabbed a pistol and went to the front, saw people, armed men in his living room, and opened fire, and they shot him. So the crime he was accused of was a 5-year crime, not a life sentence, not anything violent, nothing crazy, and they didn't even know that he was indeed doing it. They just suspected it. And it was an administrative crime anyway, so the whole thing is absolutely silly.
Well, I mean, just like the Branch Davidian thing, if they had just let David Koresh go to the store, they could have picked him up, you
The
know?
sheriff said afterward famously that I know David Koresh. If they'd have just called me, I could have called him and he'd have came in for a cup of coffee and they could have dealt with it all right there.
Yeah. I mean, this just kind of goes to that, this is not something that's new. When we criticize any federal law enforcement, it's not because of what happened under, say, the Biden administration or what happened, under the Obama years. I mean, it's something that's been part of the DNA of these federal agencies since the very beginning. I mean,
Patterns and practices. Yeah.
and this is one that they're just very cavalier with the liberty of Americans, right? And yeah, do they affect most people? No, they don't affect most people. But if it happens to affect you somehow, then all of a sudden it's about the most tyrannical form of, it's just like that we were talking about with the January 6th guy from last week, that one guy's story. I mean, they were literally like catfishing him with, and trying to catch him. It was like entrapment, these just doing everything they can to entrap people. And you're right, with the Fed's money and with all their lawyers, they can throw at, they can make it so expensive for you to defend yourself that you're gonna, even if you win, you're gonna break yourself.
Yeah, they're gonna beat you down one way or the other. So the best thing to do is not get involved in their system.
Let's see. Yardic Boy, $5 Canadian, said, Rhodesia, one of the main conduits for aid and money to terror groups were NGOs. Remember the Emmanuel shooting school missionary murders? Yep. NGOs have been, since they became a thing, have been a conduit for supporting terrorists. And it continues to this day with, UNRWA
USAID.
and, well, USAID, but also I'm thinking of literally the UN working directly with the Hamas in Gaza with UNRWA. So, all right, let's move on. Joe, a little tactical-wisdom.com. Anything to tell the folks about?
Nothing new. Book sales are abysmal. Class registrations aren't much better. So do us a favor. Go over there and buy a t-shirt, a book, a patch, something. Motivate me to do something better for you. I did try to do a video over the weekend, but it's Montana in February, and I had about 3 feet of snow on top of the Starlink antenna, which has now been fixed. So the live stream from this weekend will be uploaded today. We'll get it out there. The not so live stream, where we're talking about a modern day Bloody Kansas, what it would look like. And I guess the TLDR is that Bloody Kansas was a 9-year period because it took a long time to get anywhere, and it took even longer for news to get out. There wasn't instantaneous updates and live video feeds as there are now. So a Bloody Kansas might look a lot shorter than it was then.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, and that, with like so many incidents, right? It's not just one thing. It's all the things that develop over time that contribute to it. So there's a lot that goes into it. So it's and of course, Bloody Kansas led to other things. All right. Let's jump into our main topic for today. Talking some Putin stuff going on, Russia stuff more broadly. Trump says he has spoken directly to Putin about ending the Ukraine war. So, as just based on what we've been reporting recently, you had high-level back and forth between the Trump administration and Putin's folks. And so this is the first reporting that they may have actually talked to each other. President Donald Trump said this weekend that he spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin about ending Russia-Ukraine war, drawing a response from the Kremlin. Speaking to the New York Post in an exclusive interview aboard Air Force One, Trump said he did speak with the Russian leader about the war, and asked how many times he's spoken to Putin in recent days. Trump said, "I'd rather not say." However, Trump says he believes Putin does care about the carnage on the battlefield and wants to see people stop dying. All those dead people, young, beautiful people, they're like your kids, 2 million of them, and for no reason, Trump said, referring to soldiers dying in the war, adding that the conflict would never have happened if he were president in 2022. Elaborating, but without providing many details, Trump said, he says it hopes it goes fast. Every day people are dying. The war is so bad in Ukraine. I want to end this damn thing. That's actually pretty strong language for Trump, believe it or not. I want to end this damn thing. Usually he just kind of segues into how he's the only one that can stop it, but it sounds to me like he's seen enough of these videos of the destruction that's going on over there that it's hard to be flippant about that kind of stuff. Longtime Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, told the TASS state news agency that many different communications are emerging between Moscow and Washington. He said these communications are conducted through different channels. Peskov said, I personally may not know something, be unaware of something. Therefore, in this case, I can neither confirm nor deny it. So it sounds like these are pretty, if Trump says he's talked to him, then he's talked to him. How fast, Joe, do you think it'll be before we start to see something? Because this clearly is not going to be an overnight process. How fast do you think it's going to be before we see something concrete come out of this?
I don't know, because the wild card in here is still Volodymyr Zelensky.
Exactly.
And he needs some sort of a package and assurance. Unless, of course, you're going to solve the Zelensky problem another way. He needs to be bought off or sent away or something. So we have a long road before this thing is going to end. It's not going to be automatic like everyone thinks. Russia has concerns that need to be addressed, and the Ukrainian side has concerns that need to be addressed. And the U.S. can't necessarily address them for everyone. It's not our problem.
Well, that's the problem is that we are like $200 billion into this fucking thing thanks to the Biden administration. So, I mean, I feel like, it's not our problem, but unfortunately, the previous administration has chained it, has hung it like an albatross around the Trump administration's neck. And it doesn't help that Trump basically said, I can solve this problem, during the campaign, right? So I think you're right. I think the real wild card is Zelensky. I think a buyout is probably the easiest way to go for him. Hey, Zelensky, you're gonna play ball. You're gonna sign the thing, and then you're gonna retire now that the war is over, and you're gonna retire to either London or Arizona,
Miami,
or someplace like that. It says here that Trump may meet with Zelensky next week. And he said, if we're talking about a deal, then let's do a deal. We're open for it, Zelensky said. Let's develop this together, make money. Most importantly, it's about this. So the fact that he said make money, talking about the end of the slaughter of his people, I mean, that just shows you where his head's at, and he thinks that now that Trump's in office, that this is all going to be just a giant development deal. I think he had the wrong people for that. Because I don't think he can be part of this. But Zelensky cautioned that Trump must meet with him before he meets with Putin or on ending the war. The reason, he said, is because meeting with Putin first would look like a dialogue about Ukraine without Ukraine. Whatever. Ultimately, we don't really need Zelensky to make this deal, but if it makes it go quicker, I guess. All right, moving on to our next story here. Joe, since this whole war has been going on, we've seen a lot of interesting chicanery going on in the Baltic Sea with these. This is something that it's been a common thing that we've talked about in the odds and ends over the last several years. These Baltic Sea cable incidents pile up, and so normally what happens is some kind of a communication cable or a power cable under the Baltic Sea connecting, say, Sweden to Estonia or something like that. It gets cut, and then almost always the offending ship is some sort of Russia-connected freighter that is dragging its anchor. Yep.
Russia or China.
Right. Russia and China connected tankers that's dragging an anchor and then severs these, kind of lines or whatever. But, so you think, okay, it happens and it's happening more than once or whatever. But the thing that I found to be really interesting is when I saw this map. And essentially, these are there's three different types of things here: telecommunication lines, electricity, and gas. And then specifically the two gas ones where they're talking about are the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. But let's be honest, those things got cut by the CIA, not by the Russians or the Chinese. The rest of them, however, yes, in fact, I do believe they were cut by the Chinese and the Russians. So when you see how many it's been going on, it's just kind of very interesting, because they do add up. It says here in 3 months between November and January, 3 incidents of damage to Baltic Sea underwater cables have taken place, severing at least partly 7 different communication links that connect to the Baltic states like Sweden, Finland, and Germany to Estonia, Latvia, and the other kind of Baltic dwarves. All in all, they've counted damage to 10 different underwater cables, 3 gas pipes, starting with the highly publicized rupture of Nord Stream 1 and 2 by the CIA back in 2022. A report by the Washington Post citing anonymous officials said on January 19th that intelligence and other evidence pointed to negligence rather than malice in the cases of 3 of the incidents that took place in 23 and 24. Suspected in these are 2 Chinese registered ships, both reportedly with Russian links, and 1 vessel believed to be part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet dodging sanctions. However, an additional incident, the third in just 3 months, took place, stoking suspicions. Joe, here's my question. I'm curious what the incidents look like in, say, the 5 years prior to the war starting. I wonder if we had like 0 events in those 5 years and then 10 events here. I wonder, because these things are generally not coincidences.
Well, I think certainly that the frequency of them is going up, but I think that comes down to the normalization, right? They're doing this on an increased thing, and all this article is focused solely on the Baltic. The phenomenon is not. We're having a plethora of cut cables around Taiwan, Kinmen, and Matsu Islands in the South China Sea. Well, not the South China Sea, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
We don't use their language in the Pacific. So I think it's a matter of scale, and I think that they're trying to normalize this and make it seem like, it's just something that happens now back and forth in gray zone warfare. Then on one day when 15 of them get cut, no one's able to react fast enough, and it'll be the beginning of an actual move.
Just kind of checking to see how many cables and lines, the same kind of thing that's been happening around China and Taiwan. So it says here at least 5 underwater cables around Taiwan have been severed recently. So absolutely, this is something that is not a Baltic only kind of thing. I know we've reported on it at least twice here on this program for these, and so. you know, even in these cases of the Taiwan lines being cut, there were, you know, the Ministry of Defense in Taiwan said that some of this is due to natural deterioration. It makes me wonder. It makes me wonder how quickly they are to, you know, essentially make excuses so it doesn't draw attention to a potentially active conflict that's going on underneath everybody's noses. Like you said, gray zone tactics, right? These are the kind of things that can happen in a either deniable or unattributable type of situation. This is the kind of thing we saw a lot during the Cold War. So kind of nod in the week to those types of tactics.
I think that it's the fact that Taiwan immediately lied about the last two tells you there's more going on than there is, because they immediately said, no, both those cables are really old. Oh, so they both failed within an hour of each other off of Matsu Island because of natural deterioration. I don't believe it, especially when the same ship transited over both, right?
Yeah.
It tells you that there is more of a gray zone conflict going on than what they're telling you about.
Yep. I think that's spot on, Joe. All right, moving on. We're going to talk a little bit about Russian bases in Syria. So if you remember, there were two big Russian bases, one a Navy port and the other an Air Force base in Syria. And when HTS just basically steamrolled over Syria in December now, you know, Russia started almost immediately evacuating Tartarus and Kameni Air Base in Latakia. In my memory, I reversed the K and the T in that, so that's why it comes out as Latakia, but it's Latakia for sure. Have been scrambled, so they basically left immediately. And of course, there's nothing immediate about leaving. It's a process. But now it looks like there may be a window to, HTS, the new HTS leaders who are in charge of Syria now, may be opening the door to potentially allowing Russia to keep these bases. It says here, in an unexpected development, Syrian Islamist HTS government, let me change this. Still showing the Baltic Sea one. All right. There we go. HTS government says it's open to allowing Russia to keep its permanent air and naval bases on the Mediterranean coast. Russian forces throughout the country are rapidly pulled back to two bases since Bashar al-Assad's December 8th ouster, since the naval base at Tartarus and Kameni. How do you say that? Kameni? I think that's right. Airbase near
Hmaimim Air Base.
What is it?
Hmaimim.
Oh, it's one of those the silent K deals.
Yeah.
Hmaimim Air Base near Latakia have seen a scramble of personnel packing up equipment with the fate of the base is uncertain. Regional reports have said that much of the equipment is being relocated to a friendly port in eastern Libya under warlord Haftar. But Moscow would clearly like to maintain its only deep water Mediterranean port and wants the best outcome for its strategic presence in the Middle East. If you were a betting man, Joe, do you think Russia keeps these? I think they do. I think they make a deal.
Sorry, that trying to pronounce that just took it out of me for a second. I think that Russia would love to hold on to these areas. They're vital and strategic for them. It helps them control that half of the Med. But I don't know how much Al Qaeda is willing to let them exist in their backyard. It's tough.
Yeah. Let's see. Russia's attitude towards the new Syrian government has improved significantly. The and Damascus is weighing Moscow's demands. Let's see. They signaled a dramatic shift amongst former militants who make up the Syrian government. Until recently, rebel fighters were under constant bombardment by Russian warplanes, but in politics, there are no permanent enemies, he said of Moscow, once Assad's most powerful ally. Asked if Russia would be allowed to maintain its naval ports at Tartarus and in Latakia, he says, if we get the benefits for Syria out of this, then yes. So, i.e., even HTS is for sale, Joe. It makes me feel like these.
The entire fact that the guy put on a suit proved that he is willing to sell his body to whomever the highest bidder is, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fairness, I think the old school Al Qaeda would take your money, but they would never really sell out. They were in it to win it. But these new guys, I think they're a little jaded and they are exactly who they have always been. But I think they seek a little more comfortable life now. One major card that Washington has yet to play is the ongoing crippling sanctions that have not been lifted. Currently, the EU said it will be discussing lifting sanctions on the country's oil and energy sector, but the U.S. appears to be in no hurry. That's because we're sitting on top of their oil.
Back the oil field.
And ironically enough, Trump did say that he's looking at several options to pull all the troops out of Syria. So that'll be interesting to see how
that's not the first time I've heard Donald Trump say that.
That is true. Washington might attempt a quid pro quo, which requires Damascus to tell the Russians to finally pack it up and leave. And in return, the U.S. sanctions would be dropped. The capital and most other cities still have perhaps an hour of electricity a day, and food and basic necessities of life are still extremely expensive after sanctions-induced inflation. And these are the two basics.
That's living in a without rule of law society, right?
Yeah.
Electricity 1 hour a day.
But also, U.S. officials might see Russia as possibly a stabilizing presence. That's true. I could see that too, right? Yeah. I don't know if Russia takes this deal or not. I think it's 6 half dozen the other. Maybe they sprinkle a good amount of Chechens in there so that they can, do the secret handshake with
the Brits are on Cyprus. Russia wants to remain in Syria.
Exactly. I think because that's their counterbalance.
Because just north of there is the Dardanelles and the Strait of Bosphorus.
Yeah.
And they want their piece to try and force it open, and we want ours to kind of force it closed. So
it'll be interesting to see what happens, to see, are we going to leave the SDF up in the northeast out to dry? Are we going to turn them over to Turkey, basically? Are we going to, hold the oil fields? I think there's a lot of pressure to get our troops out of there. That being said, like you said, that was something he tried to do in the past and was unsuccessful. Maybe he just didn't care. Who knows? But we shall see. This is definitely an area that we are, we're in a time of instability. And then on top of it all, Israel has permanent control of a big section down here, only about 20 kilometers away from, I think going up. So this here is the Golan Heights. This here is Lebanon, and there's a mountain up here that they control, and basically like this, that they've created as a security buffer. I never heard anything about the Druze. Did you hear anything about whether or not there was any kind of movement to resettle the Druze into Israeli occupied sections, or
well, I've heard that offer has been made, but why would they want to?
Yeah.
Part of the whole Druze lifestyle is that's their homeland.
Yeah, they're actually connected to the land. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that tends to be a thing in the Middle East. You'd think a society with all these nomadic people wouldn't be nearly as tied to the land, but shockingly they are. All right, moving on. So the last one here in the Russia Putin section of our show today, we've got little Rocket Man. Little story about him. Kim Jong-un offers rare remarks on state of Ukrainian war, blames U.S. wild ambition. So as everybody knows, North Korea has supplied upwards of 10,000 troops and a lot of material, specifically a lot of artillery to Russia, 10,000 troops fighting in the Kursk area. And based on Western reporting, as many as 50% of these North Korean people involved in fighting in Kursk have been turned into casualties of all types. So I have no way of verifying that. I would have said it was probably more like 1,000, but what do I know? In rare words, assessing the state of Russia-Ukraine war, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has blamed the United States for exacerbating and prolonging the death and destruction with an aim on inflicting strategic defeat on Russia. Joe, I hate to say it, but if I said, Scott McCullough on Council on Future Conflict back in 2022 blamed the U.S. for exacerbating because when we poured all that money in there, that's exactly what I said. Is that we're just making this last longer, and ultimately we're just doing it because we want to embarrass Russia.
I think what actually happened was Kim Jong-un finally opened the copy of Tactical Wisdom that I sent him. And he saw where I pointed out that the whole start of this was Vicky Nuland and us overthrowing the Ukrainian government in 2014. And he was like, that guy makes a lot of sense.
That's exactly
I'm
right.
just kidding. I didn't send a book to our enemies. I would never do that.
That doesn't mean they don't have one, though, Joe.
That's true. That's true.
He made the remarks on the occasion of the 77th anniversary of the Korean People's Army, telling the gathering of his generals and top officers that the U.S. is blinded by the wild ambitions for establishing a unipolar hegemony. Here's the funny thing here is that he's not wrong, but it's more so the fantasy of our failed unipolar hegemony from the 1990s, because in fact in the 90s it was a unipolar world, but we basically lost the plot, and China rose in the 90s and the 2000s, and now we are in at least a bipolar world, maybe even a multipolar world. Starting last year, North Korea injected troops into the conflict based on a defense agreement with Moscow the summer prior, but reports are that some 10,000 DPRK troops sent have been confined to assisting the defense of Russian territory of Kursk. I wouldn't be surprised, Joe, if they basically said, "Listen, we'll let our soldiers help you fight and defend Russia, but we won't be on the offense inside Ukraine." That's probably the deal. It kind of keeps the North Korean hands clean. Ukraine has recently said the North Koreans withdrew from the front lines in Kursk, but now they are back after taking possibly hundreds of casualties. The Korean Central News Agency, or KCNA as we like to call them, cites that Kim has expressed serious concern over the reckless behavior of the U.S. and Western group internationally, fostering the prolonged war for the unrealized dream to deal a strategic setback to Russia. As much as I hate agreeing with people that I am fundamentally against, Kim Jong-un being, the biggest communist in the world. Well, he's not really a communist, but maybe, he might be. I don't know. Anyway, the point is that he says he's a communist. I don't want to agree with a communist, but that doesn't make him wrong just because he's a communist on this point. Same with the Russian propaganda that comes out that justifies their side of the war, right? That doesn't mean, it's kind of like a broken clock is right twice a day, right? And in the case of how the Ukrainian war started, especially going back to the 2014 and the stuff that happened before 2014, because there was a lot going on there. I really felt like this is Ukraine trying to, do everything they can to suckle up against the NATO teat. Joe, I mean, let me ask you this: how do you feel when you find yourself on, disagreeing with Americans and agreeing with Russians and North Koreans?
It's crazy. I guess what I'll say is even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah,
And,
right.
I guess that's the best way to look at it, right?
That's how I sleep at night.
I think this proves that maybe every once in a while that crazy man up there has one foot in lucidity, and he gets things right. Never forget that this is a man who strapped his own uncle to an anti-aircraft gun and launched him into orbit, right?
Yep.
He's not exactly a good man.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and this is the disingenuous criticism of anybody, specifically on the American left, that likes to say, "Oh, they're just parroting Russian talking points and things like this." Well, that's totally disingenuous, right? Because just because Russia is ruled by an authoritarian strongman who doesn't believe that his people deserve liberty or freedom, doesn't mean that when he and I say things that I co-sign his entire way of governance. And so it's, is this important for us to mention? I think it is, because I think a lot of you in the chat find yourself agreeing. You guys are a pretty liberty-loving group of folks. And ultimately you find yourself, wow, I find myself agreeing with Putin here, or I find myself, literally hearing Kim Jong-un saying things that I was saying, 3 years ago. So that doesn't necessarily make us wrong. What it does is it means that we just, see this problem through a similar lens, right? And, Joe, one of the criticisms that you were very correct, I think, on is the U.S. foreign policy and military folks do a really terrible job of putting themselves in the shoes of their enemy, specifically in the case of the Russians here.
That's because Russians are evil orcs. They're not actual human beings. So that's why they never consider them as humans.
Don't encourage them, Joe. Don't encourage them. But but see, that's just it, right? Is that people are motivated by various different things, and the Russians, if Texas broke away from the U.S. and then and the CCP went in to try to start getting Texas to align with the Chinese Communist Party, you don't think that we wouldn't stop that and potentially reinvade Texas in order to seize it and drive out?
If you don't think so, that's like the entire plot of Book 5 of Blue Dawn.
Exactly right. But the point is that, yeah, I mean, this shit, if you put it in an American context, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I totally understand it then. That's right.
I will point out that Captain Dolio of the Purebloods is a hero of the Second Texas Revolution.
Speaking of North Korean gear in, this tweet from Foreign Policy I thought was kind of interesting. This basically just talks about what's inside weapons Russia is using against Ukraine. So these are missiles and different systems from Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And these flags over here on the right are essentially where the components, these like whether it's the micro, transistors or the circuits and all this kind of stuff, where does it come from? And they're identifying a lot of these coming in from essentially all over the industrialized world, to include Taiwan. Russia's using Taiwanese source stuff and several of their things. So is Iran. Iran's got America, Japan, Canada, Swiss, German, and Taiwanese stuff in their stuff. So it's funny how global our enemies' weapon systems are. It's almost like sanctions don't work, Joe.
It's almost like war makes money no matter who's involved for every side. Wild.
That's exactly right. Well, and I think more specifically, it goes down to the fact that ultimately, most of these are not like greedy Germans, like I'm going to sell stuff to Russia and Iran and North Korea. No, this is stuff that's German, that's available on the international market, and it's sold in India or it's sold in South America or something like that, and then it's bought on the secondary market and it re-imported into these countries.
Well, a lot of it's not necessarily sold as the end product, right?
Exactly.
That's why there's a lot of controls. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of export controls on video game systems.
Right.
Because a lot of the same chipsets are used in a lot of other things. So
I remember hearing, this is 15 years ago, the PlayStation 3 had an export control on it for a while because the chipset that was on the PlayStation 3 was being used by China or somebody like that for some sort of they were basically buying the systems, pulling the chipsets out and putting them into the weapon system. So pretty crazy. All right.
Did you see this silly article that claims that they've lost so many trucks that now the Russians are using camels to transport supplies?
I did see that. I did. Oh my God.
First of all, you could tell that they're standing in the middle of a zoo and it's just a bunch of soldiers being idiots, right? Because soldiers are idiots when they go to other countries and have a little bit of downtime. But everyone was mocking it. As if we didn't use mules and camels throughout Afghanistan to move things in the mountains. But hey, whatever.
Yeah, well, yeah, this is absolutely true. And let's be honest, pack animals are not, they're not the worst thing in the world, especially if it's, muddy terrain or something like that where, vehicles might not work out. Don't knock it till you try it. All right.
We saw, what was that? The Indians who have the mortar mounted on a camel. Come on.
Yeah, I don't know that works. Don't encourage them, Joe.
Works the first shot just fine. After that,
it's not good. It's the follow up. That's all right. Moving on. We're going to talk a little bit of Africa now, because a lot of shit's going on in Africa. We've talked about this. This Democratic Republic of Congo kind of. I don't know if it's a civil war because the M23 rebels are technically supported by Rwanda and they're Tutsis, but
it's an ethnic war.
Yeah, it's more of a tribal lines and whatnot. So I thought it would be worthwhile to kind of dive in a little deeper into that conflict, and understanding that it absolutely has the ability to splash out and cause conflict on a kind of a broader scale there in Central Africa. Let's see. So if you remember, we reported last week that the city of Goma in eastern Congo was seized by the M23 rebels. A lot of civilian casualties were reported, and essentially a state of lawlessness with the rebels being basically the only center of power. We had UN had to get a lot of their people out very quickly. And then some South African, what was that South African unit doing there in that area?
Well, the South African unit was part of the UN forces that were there to serve as a buffer. And I'm going to do something I don't normally do here. I'm actually going to kind of sing a couple of praises of the SANDF before they got defeated. The South Africans are still there because they chose to remain while everyone else evacuated and fought a rearguard action. And they lost 14 men doing so and are currently confined to quarters on the Goma Air Base, surrounded by M23. M23 is feeding them and housing them and is working them out safe passage to go home. But to add insult to injury, M23 is not going to allow them to go south into Uganda. They have to go into Rwanda and out, kind of a walk of shame, and they're being forced to do so without vehicles or weapons. There are other South African forces in the area, and South Africa had an emergency meeting this afternoon, South Africa time, where they're sending additional forces into the area. They're actually doing the right thing here and treating the 14 dead as national heroes for fighting a rearguard action to help others get out. But I think that it does have the risk of spiraling into a wider Pan-African war.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That kind of goes after what it says here. Let's see. There was a regional summit aimed at ending the resurgent violence in the eastern DRC. The summit ended with a call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. But while there was a lull in the fighting, many feared the ceasefire was less likely than an escalation to a wider regional war. Rwanda does not officially admit its involvement in the latest episode of the long-running devastating conflict in eastern DRC, but M23, an armed group of Rwanda's tacit and practical support, has taken the capital of the northern Kivu province, Goma, and is now moving south to expand the territory now under its control. At stake is control of a mineral-rich region of crucial strategic significance and the fate of civilians who are frequently the subject of ethnically targeted attacks. But also the question of whether national borders can act as a sort of constraint. Let's see.
Ironically, Dr. Dash, which is a PR account for the M23 rebels, they like to say that the South Africans are there trying to steal the gold from the Congolese. That's ironic given the fact that the M23 rebels invaded from the Rwandan side for the exact express purpose of stealing the gold. But hey, what do I know? This is Africa, right?
This is Africa.
Insert Danny Archer. This is Africa.
Everybody wants to steal the gold, essentially. You know what? I think I have something for that. No, I thought I did, but I don't. Never mind. Oh, yeah, I do.
TIA, right, Med?
TIA.
What's TIA?
This is Africa.
That's the second best clip in that movie. The best clip is just before that.
I will say...
We call it Zimbabwe now, don't we? And he says, do we?
Do we? I hate to see her look dumb, but, she is one of the hottest actresses ever to breathe air. So
she is one of the best parts of that movie.
All right. Since the breakdown of peace negotiations in December, Rwanda-backed rebels have basically gone on a tear, seizing the capital of Goma. So I don't know if you heard about this, Joe. This was kind of distasteful bit of news came out of, I think this was Friday or Saturday it came out. Hundreds of female inmates at the Goma's prison were raped and burned alive after a mass jailbreak last week. Makes clear that the humanitarian consequences of the violence are profound. Sexual violence as a weapon of war is rife. Children are often forced to fight, and millions have been displaced over the long history of the conflict, which all told has killed about 6 million people. Almost 3,000 have been killed in the most recent fighting, and the UN says a number that is expected to rise, and more than 700,000 have been displaced. And this is what really kind of spreads that fear of a wider regional conflict, because Rwanda can only support the M23 guys for so long before DRC or one of the other countries around there basically gets sick of it, and then then it becomes start saber rattling, and I hate to say it, but these are like the blind leading the blind. When African countries start fighting each other. So just to
Now
get a
there's
little
no
into
Belgian or French contingent to put an end to all of that.
I hate to say, it's almost like when the colonial powers were still engaged, things were a lot more peaceful.
Well, and I think it's important to note that if you remember the chain of events in 1994, when the Hutus and the Tutsis were going at it, and it got so bad that the entire international outcry, even from the Rwandan government, was, we need the Belgians to come back here and solve this for us. And the Belgians did in rather short order. But
Right.
that's not going to happen now. So,
So kind of hit a little bit of the historic context about this. The spate of new violence is the latest episode of a decades-long conflict that has its roots in the 94 genocide of neighboring Rwanda, where an estimated 800,000 people from the Tutsi ethnic group were slaughtered by majority Hutus. As the genocide ended, about 1 million Hutus, fearing reprisals, fled to eastern DRC, then called Zaire. Rwanda and its new Tutsi-led government sought to exert influence in the region. After years of relative quiet, M23, largely drawn from Tutsis in and around northern Kivu, which is that eastern province of DRC, they reemerged as a regional force in 2021 ahead of the elections of 2023. President Felix Tshisekedi promised an offensive aimed at quashing the rebellion. That effort quickly ran aground, and M23, with the support of Rwandan forces, seized new territory again. That's interesting that the Hutus in the government of Rwanda potentially are supporting Tutsi rebels from in DRC. I wonder if I'm missing something there.
well, they twist a lot of language in this region, because Karen raised a great question.
Yeah.
Is ethnic attacks used as a reason to attack versus desire for gold? When they say ethnic attack, it automatically makes people in the West think of race on race. But that's not what they mean there.
No.
Ethnic cleansing and ethnic tax there means two different tribes.
Tribes, yeah.
You and I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between them, but they can, based upon, I don't know, tattoos or facial markings or whatever one tribe has versus the other, right? And knowing what town everyone is from, or regional accents or things like that. It is really, really not what we would technically call ethnic cleansing. It's tribal cleansing.
Yeah. So the irony is, Joe, that this reminds me an awful lot of like the types of bloodletting you saw in and around Bosnia, where you basically had very closely related people in the Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Serbia areas that are basically the same people with just very slight differences: Orthodox, Catholic, and Muslims.
And let me tell you the problem from a law enforcement perspective there, having worn a patch or two there, right? You stand an Albanian, a Croatian, and a Serbian side by side and tell me which is which when they're all wearing camouflage and all carrying an AK-47.
Yeah.
You can't until one of them starts yelling Allahu Akbar, right? It's a little bit crazy. So.
Yeah, Daisy Girl Williams is not wrong here. Like the Hatfields and the McCoys.
It's exactly what it's like.
Yeah. So who are the M23 militia? So the March 23 movement, known as M23, takes its name from a peace agreement signed on that day in 2009. They were formed in 2012 from the remnants of the predecessor Tutsi rebel group, which had integrated into the Congolese army. The M23 say they aim to protect their fellow Tutsis in the region amid increasing ethnic violence against them, and to secure the recognition of Tutsi refugees forced to flee to Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi as DRC citizens. The DRC government asserts that this cause is front for Rwandan interference in its sovereign territory, which is probably true, honestly. Meanwhile, rebels say that any peace deal must feature a general amnesty for their members and a reintegration into the DRC army. Crucially, M23 no longer casts itself as solely Tutsi group. They describe themselves as a broader Congolese movement. They are now under the umbrella of an organization called the Congolese River Alliance, and they recruit outside the existing community boundaries, i.e. hire mercenaries. Let's see. And then so Rwanda, they're definitely locked into this.
River is a weird way of saying Ebola. But hey, whatever.
I wouldn't. This is one of the reasons why I will never go to the Congo.
Right.
There are just things that are telling me on a biological level that I shouldn't.
They were probably like, well, let's call it the Ebola River movement. Wait, that's a terrible idea.
Let's see. So Rwanda says that its priority in the region is to take on Hutu militias, which it said pose a genocidal threat against Tutsis. The most prominent of these is the Democratic Forces of the Liberation of Rwanda. Kigali's approach is fueled by a sense that history gives it the right to stake there. And you've got the Rwandophones, so Hutsis and Tutsis who speak the Rwandan national language. Let's see, they have a sense of grievance because of that, but you also have to ask, where would it stop if African countries started revisiting colonial borders? Oh my God. The ripple effects could be very dangerous, and there is no question there will be alarm in Africa. Yeah, so this is why, and so these colonial borders tend to be where these worries of wider conflicts come from, because these borders a lot of times were very arbitrary. All right, that's about all I wanted to cover on this. All right, let's. Speaking of Southern Africa, we talked a lot about what was it, the expropriation law that came up in South Africa, Joe. We talked a lot about that. And essentially, that's a law that would state that the government can, if they have a need, they could seize any property. And our friend Gideon came on to talk about that. And he correctly said not only is it land property, but also it could be intellectual property that they could seize. So literally any property, if they choose to, they can,
as
basically,
long as it advanced equity.
Equity, right? Which means, kill the whiteys, right?
Yeah.
Because that's literally what the EFF has been. They've been singing "Kill the Boer" for quite some time. Some Afrikaners cheer as Trump amplifies claim of persecution. So Trump came out over the weekend and basically said that he recognized the persecution that the Afrikaners are going under, and these are the white South Africans, and that he would offer them refugee status in the U.S. and allow them to resettle to the U.S. And now I saw very quickly both Gideon and Canine Reaper, the two South Africans that we have here on the channel from time to time, both of them said that they would prefer to stay. And I think that's the general mood of most Afrikaners. That being said, I think a lot are at the end of their rope. And
I believe that actually 60,000 have applied for asylum already.
Oh, is it that much?
Donald Trump's announcement. So, but that's going to be interesting because that word needs to trickle down to the individual immigration offices and individual embassies and consulates, because we can't even get a white South African to come here on a tourist visa that was already approved. We actually know of 2 white South Africans who were denied entry to the U.S. So,
under the previous administration, but that doesn't mean the deep state is completely
Yeah,
on board.
but you see, like John C's was given a 5-year ban on an attempted reentry. Now that did not happen to Canine Reaper
Yeah,
because he never made it that far. But John
he
C
was just
can't,
applying for the visa, right?
huh? What?
John C. actually flew to the U.S., right,
On a tourist visa.
on a tourist visa. Yeah, that's right. Um, let me dive into this a little bit. For decades, some members of the white Afrikaner minority have been trying to convince anyone and everyone that would listen that they are true victims of post-apartheid South Africa. They have claims of mass killings of their people and widespread land grab. Do you remember when the farm murders things first started coming out, and people were literally said, "You're complaining about white people getting murdered is like basically, like neo-Nazi propaganda." Like,
Yeah,
like
it's crazy, but it's been
I
happening for a very long
the,
time.
the sad thing is, Joe, that so many of those farm murders have occurred that you can't overlook it at this point.
Well, the problem began in Rhodesia, and because I refused to call it that
and
other name, and it all but eradicated the Afrikaners in Rhodesia. So,
yeah, well, I mean, yes, because they got expropriated out of existence essentially.
every time they
Um,
bring up a policy like this, I say, if only there was a historical example of where this ends directly to the north.
and it's Rhodesia. Yeah, exactly
Yeah.
right. They have made claims of mass killings of their people and widespread land grabs by black-led government that they insisted is seeking retribution for the sins of the Afrikaner-led apartheid governments. Their stories have uh, they claim their stories have been false or greatly exaggerated, but this hasn't stopped them from being widely amplified and repeated online. Afrikaners as a ethnic group descend from the European, primarily Dutch colonizers, some and also English. So Trump on Friday put weight of the American influence behind a hotly disputed claim that Afrikaners were victims of unjust racial. Now, so you're going to hear skeptical language in this story because this is the New York Times. They don't believe that these claims are true. They basically think it's fucking Pollyanna fairy tale land for the white South Africans. And they believe all the bullshit that the EFF and the ANC have been selling. So you're just going to hear that in this. So that the Afrikaners are quote unquote victims of unjust racial discrimination, issuing an executive order to allow them to migrate to the U.S. as refugees, halting aid to South Africa. The move was met by dismay in South Africa, a majority black nation where more than 90% of the population comes from racial groups persecuted by racist apartheid regime. These groups, black, colored, and Indian, still remain statistically far behind the white minority in virtually every economic measure.
That's not true. You keep calling
it's absolutely not true. Yeah, it's absolutely not true. There have been some gruesome murders of white farmers, the focus of the Afrikaner grievances, but police statistics suggest that they account for a very small share of the country's killing. Oh, shocking, Joe, that the murders of a minority, like a less than 10% minority of the population, aren't the vast majority of murders in South Africa. That's because it's like tens and hundreds of thousands of blacks kill each other in South Africa every year.
Yes.
All right, let me continue.
Our friends at AfriForum, and I'll say that because everyone says, "Oh, AfriForum, neo-Nazi." No, they're not. They're not even close. Pointed out that when you look at it per capita, it is absolutely a genocide of the white farmers. Just because the numbers are smaller doesn't mean it's not disproportionately affecting white farmers the most. They are the most homicided section of society in Africa, South Africa.
Billy Bloggs apparently didn't get his DEI contract canceled yet, so you're gonna have to re-educate yourself there, my friend. All right. Let's see. Trump on Friday. It's not clear whether Trump's interest in South Africa has been influenced by Elon Musk. I bet it is. Now, one of his close advisors, who was born and raised there and has been harshly critical of the government for Afrikaners who make up 4% of the population. Mr. Trump's action was the culmination of years of international lobbying. What happened last night is probably the most significant international action on South Africa since 1994, when the apartheid regime lost power. No, the apartheid regime gave up power. Let's see. He says, let's see, this is, but they have spoken to people of Mr. Trump who have raised international awareness for their cause. We've done some things wrong, but every community has done some things wrong, Mr. Rujet, a Afrikaner, said. We've had this sense of being scapegoated and blamed for everything. The fact that there is now recognition is something I think a lot of people welcome. So the irony is that, a lot of South African Afrikaners would like to stay. They are tied to their land. Like they've been there since the 1600s. That's when the first Dutch settlers arrived in South Africa. And so,
when ironically, there was no one, I repeat, no one living there.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why they settled there in such large numbers, was because and I don't remember I can't remember the reason why. I think part of it was because the Africans couldn't use it as farmland, but the Europeans could because of their technological advances.
Well, because of how we farmed, the Africans were generally just grazing cattle, and the Afrikaners were actually growing food. Big difference.
Right. Yeah. They had steel plows, and they had irrigation, and they had all these techniques that the most, like, Zulus and people that are in these areas just didn't use, because they were still, like, I hate to say it, but almost mostly hunter gatherer.
They were, and what agriculture they did was more herding of cattle and goats than actually growing food.
Yeah.
So.
President of let's see, that's the law. After Mr. Trump made his comments, Mr. Musk and Mr. Ramaphosa on a post, Mr. asked Ramaphosa on a post on X, "Why do you have openly racist ownership laws?" Talk about calling them out. Ramaphosa said, "We have never witnessed such an escalation of diplomatic tensions," and added, "Issues with Mr. Trump raised have been laced with complete lies and distortion about our country." Oh, the irony.
If ever there was a country that needed some Western democracy forced upon it, it was probably South Africa. Anyway.
Ramaphosa spoke with Musk this past week and was emphatic, saying, "We don't have racist laws." But Mr. Musk continued to insist that white people in South Africa are being persecuted, because they are. Let's see. Kali Kriel, chief executive of AfriForum, an Afrikaner rights organization. I don't know that that's true, that it's an Afrikaner rights organization. It's a governance organization, private governance organization, not a. And if I remember correctly, Gideon said that they have people from all races within South Africa working.
They do, and any effective policing done in South Africa comes from AfriForum community security initiatives, like our friend K9 Reaper serves on.
K9 Reaper, right? That's exactly right. Let's see. Said that South Africa's own actions have alienated American leaders, particularly accusations before the International Court of Justice that Israel was committing genocide in Gaza. While he dismissed claims that white South Africans were victims of widespread killings, he cited several laws that he said target Afrikaners. One law allows the government to greater control over the language of instruction in schools, which can vary from place to place. And some Afrikaners think it will restrict the use of Afrikaans in the classrooms. It's a direct threat to our cultural existence. That's
literally what the law did. It banned Afrikaans in colleges.
As a white person, as an Afrikaner, adding that it was categorically false that white South Africans are being persecuted. This is somebody else. This is not that person. This is Melanie Verwoerd, a A former ambassador to Ireland for South Africa said the focus on Afrikaner rights inverted the history of a people who have benefited since the 17th century from land their ancestors took from Black people. And then she
They didn't
said
take it
that
from anybody. There was nobody there.
there was nobody there. That's exactly right. She says the vast majority of the poor in this country remains Black people. If any group is being treated badly or there are human rights abuses to talk to, it's that the fact that the Blacks, not whites. And then of course we see this the video of the basically the homeless family camp of white Afrikaners, and they basically have to band together when they become homeless because they have no.
That's sort of the entire point of Orania, right? The banding together of a white community for mutual defense. And it's not just a white community. Everyone thinks Orania is a white-only community. It's white, colored, Indian. There's more than that there. There's also been a big, I'm gonna use a term here, blackwashing of South African history. For example, if you ask 10 people who ended apartheid in South Africa, what are 9 of them going to tell you? They're going to tell you it was Nelson Mandela. That is not true. It was Botha, right? I'm sorry, it was de Klerk. My bad.
F.W. de Klerk, yeah.
It was F.W. de Klerk who ended it. And then they'll say, well, if you ask those same people, why was Nelson Mandela in prison? And 9 of those people would tell you, well, because he opposed apartheid. That's not why he was in prison. He was in prison because he was bombing civilian targets as part of a communist campaign.
Right.
And the most famous form of street killing in South Africa was perfected by his wife, Winnie Mandela, and that's the necklacing, putting a tire around a neck and lighting it on fire.
And Winnie Mandela was even worse, if possible, than Nelson Mandela.
Correct.
And you know, if you're curious, I mean, well, I don't have to play it today, but you know, the EEF, which is a kind of a more radical political movement, they literally chant "kill the Boer, kill the farmer" at their rallies. So this is and it's totally accepted. Shocking when people say they want to kill you. Maybe you should believe them.
Maybe.
All right. Let's move on to our final story. Now, Joe, we haven't talked about the Sahel in a while. It's one of our favorite group areas. A lot of African camo drip has come out of
what the hell is going on over there?
I know, right? That never gets old. Why a new African alliance to fight Islamists is likely to fail to Russia's benefits. So, if you remember from last year, you basically last 2 years really. You had some, Burkina Faso, Mali, are basically now free of all of their former colonial masters. Niger had French and American counterterrorist forces working in the country, but then they kicked the French and the U.S. out. Now they've got Russians helping them. And so essentially what you've got is these 3 countries have kind of banded together to fight against Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and any other Islamo-fascist kind of groups that are operating in and around the Sahel. So these military-led nations officially withdrew from the economic community, so ECOWAS, on January 29th. They announced their intention to leave 1 year ago, shortly after establishing a new defense pact. Of course, it's in French. Alliance des Estates du Sahel.
I hope that Ferrari gets to design the uniforms because that guy's got an eye for drip.
ECOWAS, which has tried to improve economic and political integration in West Africa since 1975, says it left its doors open for the 3 departed countries. The bloc has requested that member nations continue to give the trio membership privileges, including free movement within the region. However, relations between the AES states and several neighboring countries are strained. Sahel region has witnessed a wave of coups since 2020. I know it's like half of the Africa stories that we've talked about have been about the various coups and Wagner and Chinese, economic moves in the region. But instability in the Sahel has worsened since the military takeovers, with Mali and Burkina Faso the most affected states. In 2023 alone, more than 8,000 people were killed in Burkina Faso due to violence in the country, and around 2.6 million people across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are currently displaced. The AES states have now created a joint military force of 5,000 troops to tackle insecurity in the region. Niger's defense minister said the force will be deployed over the coming weeks. The alliance of Sahel states is our passport to security, he said. However, the new force's prospects for security are slim. So, like, basically, these military-led governments don't have a whole lot of popular support within the countries. It's kind of like, everybody just kind of is going along to get along. And so these jihadists are been putting a lot of pressure on these countries. And so these AES states have established a track record of human rights abuses. In 2020, for example, Malian army carried out 23 extrajudicial executions and forcibly disappeared 27 others. Joe, these are rookie numbers in an African country. So, I mean, only American NGOs could complain that that's a lot of killings in an African country. I hate to say it, but from my studies, life is cheap in Africa.
Yeah, life is not valued in Africa much as it is in other places. It's a sad state of affairs, actually.
Yeah. So should these guys fail, who is likely to pick up the pieces? In that case, so it's likely, let's see, in the recent months, relations between the AES states and some of the African neighbors have become under strain. Niger's military leader, this is the one, is this the guy you like? Brigadier General Tichani, is he the one you like in Niger? No, you like the Burkina Faso guy.
I like Captain Terrari. Well, Major Terrari. He gave himself a promotion in Burkina Faso.
Yeah, Burkina Faso. He's got that. What is it? That lizard.
He's got that desert lizard that I really like it.
Let's see. The likelihood of out of desperation, the AES military leaders will probably lean towards a heavier reliance on Russian mercenaries to curb the threat of extremist violence. This might include integrating Russia's government Africa Corps, formerly known as the Wagner Group, into joint forces operation, as well as a greater dialogue with China. We're going to be calling Russian mercenaries for the next 15 years just Wagner, until a better name comes along.
Well, I know you were about to mention China. China's got some great ideas on how to handle Islamic extremists. Turns out they're not so extreme when they forcibly donate their organs.
Exactly. We've got an organ donation program that you'd be perfect for, my friend. The consequence of this could increase the strategic competition across the troubled region. It will only diminish the prospects of peace, security, stability, rather than improving it. So this is the journalists who write these articles are so influenced by Western NGOs. It's like they don't see how potentially. It's like if you're not using some sort of Western governance model, then it can only be bad, right? In Africa, there's a lot of stability that comes from having a strong man as your leader. So I don't know that I see this working out the same way that that they do. It's only if the strongman basically steals too much from his own people that it ends up going south.
This is
But
this is the
generally,
problem we had with trying to enforce Western democracy in the Middle East, right? It's not their way. They're used to strongmen who control all of the other lesser strongmen to enough of an extent that life can go on.
yeah,
And that's kind of the way Central Africa works in Northern Africa.
yeah.
Let's just be honest. That's how Africa works.
And talking about Africa, talk about Russia, talk about all kinds of stuff. That's how this show works. All right, guys, that's all we have for today. Joe, looking towards the rest of the week, what do you have in your crystal ball?
Increasing sectarian violence in the U.S. Instead of saying protest, let's just call it what it is. The reeing is getting worse. Every day that a new revelation comes out about where your money gets spent, it proves that the government's been doing very bad things with your money against you. And the left doesn't want that exposed. They're not they don't care that the money was wasted on these dumb things. They care that you know about it, and that should tell you something about them.
Yeah, good point. Pinochet's helicopter tours for $5 says, why give weight and credence to the corrupt and confirmed USAID propagandist paper, the New York Times, the same New York Times who denied the Holocaust? The Holodomor, Walter Duranty comes to mind. Yeah, a lot of times that you get the news for these places where you can find it. And unfortunately, the resources of the New York Times allows them to have reporters in places that, more news media that's more aligned to us. And then here's the other thing too, right? Just because we don't give any credence to the New York Times, we must call out the bullshit when you see it, right? And so when you read an article from the New York Times, you have to know what you're looking for, and you have to know where they're doing real reporting and know where you're actually hearing the voice of these kind of paymasters coming through. You got to listen to all kinds of different news to see what their narratives are. So I would recommend that you at least check New York Times and other left-wing outlets' headlines. You got to get your news from all over the place. The irony too, Joe, is that I've seen is that a lot of places in the world that aren't like, if it's the current thing, right? Like it's the Middle East or it's Syria or it's Ukraine or something like that, then it's really hard to know the truth, because they will literally hide bullshit in the stories. But these areas like, Africa, there may not be as many, so a lot of times the reporters are actually interested in Africa, but they're still blinded by the, they're still blinded by the biases that they carry into the story. So it's just good kind of picking through those biases. All right, Joe, any thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you. They're blinded by their biases, and it's like they say you can't object to USAID. Those poor dumb people in the rest of the planet can't get by without our free money. Yes, they can.
I get yes, they did before USAID came along. All right. Looking towards this week, my kind of take on the week is that I think you're going to see. I saw over the weekend a very healthy amount of muscular U.S. Army, ads. So on social media ads that are coming out that, like Ranger Regiment being featured and, the ACFT and like lifting heavy weights. And the soldier said, strong men are tougher to kill. A very big vibe change on how the U.S. Army is presenting itself to the rest of the world. And I think that's nothing but good stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see, especially once Doge starts digging into the DoD, some big things changing up in the world of the DoD. I think Hegseth is bringing some very good changes to that organization already, and we'll see a lot more to come for sure. Yeah, I think that the buzzsaw of Doge will continue this week, and I can't wait for it to saw into the education department. All right, that's all I've got. Joe, thank you very much, brother. Appreciate you doing this with me. Chat, you guys are awesome as always. Thank you very much. We will be back on Wednesday. I guess Watcher will be back with us as well. So please let everybody know that you're getting some good stuff over here on the Council for Future Conflict. Share that link out. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done it already. Like the video. And as always, hit that bell for notification. Joe, thank you very much. Chat, you guys are awesome. As always, stay safe.